गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट। गना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। टुडे वी गोना टेक अप समथिंग वेरी important for the nation, and that is what are our national security priorities and what are the national security priorities of Modi 3.0. To talk about this, to give his views and educate us on the complex issue that it is, uh, I have with me General Raj Shukla. Uh, Good evening, Raj. Welcome to Gunner Shot
Thank
once
you.
again. Long time,
Thank you very much.
and you've
Yes.
taken
Thank you
on
very much,
a
sir.
very important.
Thank you very much, sir. And it's a great pleasure to be back on your show. So thank you very much.
And you chose on a very important topic, and especially in these times, uh, what are our national security priorities? It's important that we come to know what our national security priorities are, and then act on them. That's the next part. But how do you act on them if you don't know what they are? And especially in a country like India, where we've not had a national security doctrine. Normally, a not national security doctrine or a document lays down what the your outlook is and what are the priorities amongst them. We don't have them, so it is only through discussion and debate and by practice and certain macro documents like the Constitution of India, right, or laws, conventions, that we come or derive what our national security priorities are. And for this government, which is in its third term, a prime minister, a strong prime minister who's in his third term, uh, over the period of 10 to 12 years, 11 years, he's gone through the whole thing and his priorities would have crystallized. And he would probably at this point of time have some vision to see, okay, it's not the normal priorities we are thinking of, we need to start thinking longer. And those who have held important appointments, you will realize what I'm talking. As you're nearing the end of your road in any appointment, you become wiser and your ideas are wiser. And then suddenly you feel you don't have time. And in this case, we have a prime minister who spent 10 years already in chair. He's got another 4 years to go. In fact, more than 4.5 years to go. So his priorities would be far deeper. And to get an idea of what they could be, or rather second guess what he has in his mind, General Raj Shukla will take us through the whole story. Over to you, Raj.
So I tell you how this idea struck me, sir. So when Modi 3.0 came to power, I saw a spate of articles in all dailies about what we should do with regard to the economy, social sector, and so many other areas. And I said, what about national security? So I wrote a piece and I offered it to the Indian Express. I was promptly told that, sir, it will be published in 2 to 3 days. And then every day he started telling me, sir, this priority, that priority, this priority. So Indian Express didn't see national security either. He was being polite and he didn't want to publish my article for quality. Now, if that is so, I have no problem. But if it is a matter of priority, then it really struck me that there is something wrong. So I put it in on ORF online, and that article has got some 30, 35, 40,000 views, which is quite okay for a think
Oh,
tank.
yeah.
So I'm saying, sir, that it is a pretty important issue. There are people who are willing to engage about national security, but in the visible mind space, which is our prominent dailies, it is not a priority. Now, if it is not a priority, should it be a priority? And that is what I thought I will discuss with you. And why I say it should be an overwhelming priority is for these reasons. I mean, I really think that our India's strategic environment is pretty adverse for many reasons that we have discussed. But two things: one is the enormity of the China challenge, and one is the complexity of the changes in the character of war, which I and you have been debating. We just debated very recently in the seminar in Chandigarh. So, if the enormity is so great, if the if the complexity is so great, and in the national security environment, there are no runners up. There is grim competition, the winner takes it all. There are going to be no runners up. So, this assumption somehow that Amrit Kal is going to be a breezy ride, a smooth ride, is just not. Bangladesh tells us that. So,
Yeah.
going to.
Bangladesh has just told us, look, it's not hunky dory and it's full of problems,
So,
and your entire national security thought process, I think, has gone for a toss with this.
so absolutely, that's the point I'm trying to make. That our national security deserves far more attention. And in that context, I just thought to myself, what will these priorities be? And it is not, the point is really not whether you agree with my priorities or somebody else
No,
agrees.
it's not. It's a
It
national
just
priority.
gets, if it just gets mature conversations around this. Indian Express should have 10 articles on this. What should be our national
Yes.
security priorities, or various newspapers should be debating this. So it's in that context, I wish to say what our
Yeah.
priorities
Look
be.
forward. Look forward
So
to it.
now, so I was just thinking, sir, that our current focus is on three issues. I'm simplifying it for the civil audience. One is territorial combat, LAC, LC, and I'm not, undermining any of these areas. Any military man knows how important it is. You move some troops from here and see what's happening in J&K, or the line of actual control. That bit needs to be reinforced. But there are these other issues of strategic deterrence and power projection, जिसके बारे में हम बात ही नहीं करते हैं. हम शर्माए जाते हैं, and I think they are very important. And so I will, within the larger frame, the strategic context which I just spelled out, I will try and say what should be our foremost national security priorities. And the first amongst that, from a very commonsensical perspective, we need a massive upgradation in our AD framework, AD network. Just see what has been happening, the way missiles and drones are being fired all over the place. Uh, and as I said, in the Chandigarh seminar, I'll repeat it for the benefit of the audience here. Just look what protected Israel on the 14th of April. It was Iron Dome, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, US Aegis destroyers, global sensors which are deployed through the US Missile Defense Agency, integration of the radar and AD systems network by the CENTCOM over years. This integration takes years. It is just not putting radars and guns. The software part of it takes years to do it. The integration of layered AD, what AD exists in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan with the Americans and the Israelis. And even after all this, because it was a kind of gamed volley that day, cruise, ballistic, and drone missiles, the Israelis managed to ward off a major portion of the 330, missile strike, and a few got through. Now, given what is opposite us, the Chinese rocket force, do we really need a massive upgradation in our AD network, and not only in software, in hardware? So, yes, सबसे बड़ी बात है, and I'm very surprised that all this is not getting discussed. So, this is the first thing that I think that we need. The second is, I don't know, somehow air power. It appears to me that air power, air crewed piloted aircraft, the penetration of airspaces has somehow been stalemated. We are seeing in Ukraine how the AD systems have become so dense that it would extremely difficult for the third largest air force in the world, Russia, to penetrate Ukrainian airspace and vice versa. Ukraine की उतनी बात नहीं करते हैं because they don't really have an air force. But this is becoming a serious difficulty. I see it being discussed in air forces abroad. The the Americans are acknowledging this as a challenge in the air-land battle. And they are now saying either we have armed missiles or the only way to penetrate is stealth. And a consequence of this is the birth of dronery, drones. Now, drones is not a reflection on the Air Force. It is also not a choice. It has become an absolute imperative because air-crewed aircraft, their ability to penetrate these contested airspaces will be difficult. So this is something we need, a drone missile force. Or, this 42 squadron air force, it could be 32 fighter squadrons, 10 drone squadrons, 3, 4 of the high-end variety, and 6 of the low-end variety. They are cheap, $20,000 drones. So and why I'm saying all this has to be seen in the context of a possible conflict between us and China in a contested environment where your combat power will have to operate at scale, not a sneak attack. So it would seem to me that these two things are extremely important. The larger issue that I make is that why don't these issues come from our think tanks?
Yeah,
Most
I have
states
a
of
point.
yes, sir.
Sorry,
Please.
I want to actually reinforce what you said, and this is actually I resonate with what you're saying. I mean, I'll take it a step further. You see, traditionally, we felt that, traditionally air power meant aircraft, fighters, transport, reconnaissance aircraft, and things like that, and radars and things. That was the traditional concept of air power. I think that concept we have to change, because I feel today that air power consists of the old part of the air power, which was there, plus missiles, plus drones, plus air defense. So your
Yes.
entire concept of air power and air operations and counter air operations. You see, counter air operations is not just anymore about against airfields and putting the enemy air down. You have to put his drones down. You have to suppress his missiles. You have to suppress his AD. So I think there's a larger construct. I mean, I would like your views on that.
Absolutely. So you see, Gulf War 1 and 2, sir, the American air power first neutralized Saddam's AD. And I mean, at that time, it was said that he had a very potent AD, Russian AD. But the fact is that the air power first neutralized the AD, and having neutralized the AD, its effects came to bear. In Ukraine, it is precisely the opposite which has proved true. The AD has not been neutralized, and when they suffered consequences, both sides have resorted to drones. Russians are wholly dependent on Iranian for their drones, and the Ukrainians have got drones from the West and innovated. And the drones have got many varieties: FPV drones, drone on drone combat, the kamikaze drones, loiter. But it is a new domain of air power. Why is it not being discussed adequately in India as an operational concept, as an idea from the strategic community? It baffles me, because it really is an area, and these are the issues which, Modi 3.0, the people thinking about strategic military issues, should labor on these issues. Because if you miss these larger issues, mere investments in the traditional platforms may not win you the contest with China. So I may be wrong. There are people who understand air power far better than me, but the idea should be debated in depth. And this kind of strange silence is most worrisome. And I make this point again: why not think tanks? These issues should be discussed in think tanks, because it is going to affect our security, our deterrence, and our war fighting.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because I think the entire concept of air power needs a rethink. Uh, Also, the support elements of the air power have changed, like EW. EW has played a huge role in all the wars which are going on at this point of time. And so is space. Space is almost ubiquitous. The concept of space-based platforms, or space-enabled platforms, uh, impinging on aerial warfare is huge. So I think what you're saying is very big. I think it's just not the matter of air. Air and its connectivity and its support systems need a complete relook.
This
Yeah.
point that you're making, this battle between, you know, uh, air crewed fighters and AD. is a constant cat and mouse game. If you see the era from 67 to 73 in the Middle East, the Egyptians had a very powerful AD to checkmate the
The Israelis.
Israelis. And AD became so important that AD was the most the preferred arm, the chief of defense staff of Egypt. Many of them were from the air defense. So it's a matter of time. And today it does seem to me that AD is pretty central to this issue. The third point is I've got 10 issues for the government. Third
Yeah,
issue
yeah,
is
we'll go through it. We have.
what you just referred to, that platforms are important. But what is changing is that unless these platforms are integrated in terms of an enterprise solution, the platforms by themselves are not so effective. As you said, the storm of emerging technologies. I don't know how else to highlight it. Space, AI, uh, biotech, quantum. These are fundamental disruptions in the nature of what. So what we are doing is just upgrading the platforms. That needs to be done. But for example, today, targeting data for fighter aircraft is being streamed through streaming platforms like Netflix. So you subscribe into these streaming platforms. This kind of stuff, our data, I've been saying, is now it is an instrument of war, because once you unlock your data gets talking to data. uh, you will see, great improvements in your surveillance, in targeting, the new world, logistics. So data is an instrument of war, reducing margins of error, shrinking OODA loops, decision-making cycles. Just see today, a tank, sir, cannot just be bothered about the anti-tank environment. He has to take care of drones, anti-drone also. So this whole bit, AI, we made this, and at AI, look at how China is looking at it. China says that in the civil space, AI will be very regulated. Their regulations in the civil space are more stringent than EU and the USA. But in the military strategic space, it is freewheeling, national security, national interest. So AI is developing much faster. Similarly, quantum, in terms of securing your communications, in terms of breaking codes. Look what the electronic fight is doing in Ukraine, disabling HIMARS, disabling precision systems. These kind of issues, which are about, this enterprise solutions, not so much platform, also need far greater attention and disruptions. If you see our DPP or whatever the acquisitions which are brought out in the media, they are all about tanks, aircraft. We have never heard an acquisition about AI, never heard an acquisition of what we are doing with our data, because it is not in our mindset.
Yeah,
And therefore,
I completely agree with you. What we lack, if you remember, we spoke about this in the seminar also. The Recce strike information integration,
yes,
right? If you don't put all these together, you don't have a solution, and that's the enterprise. You do Recce. You don't do Recce with just your eyeballs. You do it with space. You do it with electronic warfare. You do it any number. You do it with drones. You do it also with special forces teams. I'm just giving you 4 types of Ricky, right? That has to come in. Your strike platforms are huge, like we rightly discussed. Different kinds of air power you have. You also have ground-based long-range artillery, which is kicked in, firepower as a whole. And then the information streams from whether it's AI, whether it's quantum, whether it is network or whatever, whichever way it is. So unless you integrate these, you're going nowhere. And this has to be a priority. And I think that's a very important point you said. No one goes in for acquisition of these systems.
yes. So this is another thing that needs to permeate our thinking in terms of national security. The fourth, sir, is the military-industrial complex. We have seen how Russia, if it is winning the war today, it is on the strength of its military-industrial complex. See the lengths both parties are going to. The West is looking at all their dependencies on Western kinds of electronics and is doing everything to choke it. And Russia is doing everything to get these microelectronics from China and other places so that it doesn't get choked. And other issues about, stepping up ammunition inventory, so on and so forth. In our case, while Atmanirbharta in defense has received a lot of emphasis on from the point of view of self-reliance, how we need to go forward, this intersect of technology, innovation, private sector, and startups. There is an understanding of it, but it needs to be debated far more. And I'll just give you an example. So there's a lovely book which has recently come out of by a chap called Raj Shah, an Indian American in USA, who headed their DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit, Indian American. And that is about the new partnership between Pentagon and Silicon Valley to drive future wars. I'm saying, where is our Silicon Valley for defense? Is it IIT Madras? Is it around some place in Bangalore? Bangalore is all commercial IT. We need a defense hub which feeds your military with this kind of stuff. The closest I can think of is IIT Madras, which has done some good stuff in 5G, 5G. So should we build
Yeah,
an enterprise around IIT Madras?
I have no doubt about it that we need a place. And I also have no doubt about it that at this point of time, that's your hub. There's no doubt. In fact, I'll add, if you read Eric Schmidt's, writings, he writes regularly in Foreign Affairs, right? And I thought, he's the ex-CEO of Google. The way he connects today's technologies, Silicon Valley, and how things are, transferred onto Ukraine, or for that matter, wherever, is fantastic. For example, I'll give you a thing which happened. You remember last year there was this balloon which flew across, USA
Yes.
with the help of the Chinese balloon, with the help of AI and a certain amount of database which is there internationally, and it was done by a startup. Within a matter of 3 hours, they knew exactly where this thing took off from Hainan and what was the path it took and what it carried.
Absolutely.
And this was not a military. This was not a military effort. This was completely a, 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 a startup effort. How do you integrate this is the big challenge. In a developed society like USA, you could, but how do you do it? That's the challenge with us. I want your views on this.
Absolutely. And I will just reinforce this point. Therefore, it is not only self-reliance in this sense that you pick up parts from outside and integrate them. Because from this example you're giving you, when the Americans were talking of de-risking and decoupling, Pentagon told them that if you open up the F-22, which brought down that balloon, half of the components are microelectronics is Chinese. So what are you going to de-risk? So this is the depth of the challenge. Also, I'll
Challenge.
just
Yeah.
quote this Raj Shah again. He gives a very good example. He was a pilot in the US Air Force. So 2006, he's flying an F-16 Viper over Iran, Iraq, in that general region. And, at 2 Mach, the world's most maneuverable aircraft, this, that. And he and all the other pilots would report that while a lot else was good, the navigation system was so suboptimal that you never knew whether you had crossed into Iran, 20,
Or
30
not.
kilometers navigation. So they didn't have any solution. So he went back and he picks up his compact uh, iPad, or it was a handheld device for checking emails, something as simple as that, and fed it with civil navigating software and digital maps. And for the rest of his tenure, used that to make sure that he was on the right side of the boundary and he had not violated it. Now, he makes this point in this book that a $30 million jet, the navigation system was done by a $300 handheld device. And the reason is because the device was coming from Silicon Valley and the jet was being manufactured by Boeing and Lockheed. So Silicon Valley's innovation was so many years ahead of this. And that was the idea behind DIU, linking it with Silicon Valley, because the technologies were coming from there, they were no longer coming. He gives another, or somebody else gave this example of the American military, that there was a time 4 or 5 years back when you switched on a computer given to you by, the normal issue type computers, what we call from the military. From the time you switched it on and the time you could send your first email, it used to take 30 minutes. They may
Yeah.
be secure, but they were so far behind time. And therefore, this whole business now of the other example is, of course, of Elon Musk, where Ukraine, without a navy, grew drones just because of the targeting efficacy of Starlinks, has pushed the Russian Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol. So this is what Silicon Valley technologies are doing. So in our context, and therefore I keep saying this, that the next generation of defense technologies in India has to come from startups and vibrant private sectors, fed by technologies from IITs like IIT Madras. Some of it is happening, but it is not happening in the manner that it should. And
Yeah,
therefore,
it's not organized. I think the government needs to do a lot more to focus. And more than the government, I mean, let me put it this way: I don't expect the government to do everything. I think the armed forces themselves have to start doing it
armed
on their
forces,
own.
yes.
Yeah,
And all
I'm
this cannot.
completely with you.
So DRDO, some kind of reform is happening. I hope it happens. Another area of reform, and they should do it themselves, is the financial audit guys. Their structures don't support, their thought process doesn't support innovation. See, it is not कि ये टेक्नोलॉजी लाना है, अब सबने ले ली है ये टेक्नोलॉजी, अब हम देखेंगे कैसे डीपीपी अमेंड होगी. They should see prospectively that this is how innovation is happening, this is how technologies are happening. How should we prospectively amend your all those regulations that they have? And why I'm saying it is because if you don't do it, don't start talking of it now, this is only going to get worse. So defense financial audit now needs to be put through a microscope, and they have to be made uh, accountable in the sense that they have to ensure that innovation flows. Innovation is not full of roadblocks. And why I say this, because you speak to many startups and all, they complain about this. They will not speak because the poor chaps have to get orders. But
Yeah,
there is a
naturally.
huge problem in this. And I would strongly urge the defense finance themselves to do it. Why not? There is no reform better than if you do it yourself. Why should somebody force you to do it? To please understand and do it, because it needs to be done in the interest of national security. And these are big issues which have to be debated. These conversations have to mature if we have, seriously to modernize our armed forces. The
Yeah.
next issue, sir, I'll state the next issue and then we will, I mean, you can ask some questions. Is this nuclear paradigm? Once again, you have spoken about it, many others are speaking about it. The Chinese are going through a nuclear breakout in many areas, accuracies, tonnage, a strategic system focused on the US mainland, a theater system with some tactical nuclear weapon capabilities in theater, which is WTC and Taiwan, launch on warning. You mentioned space. Now they are looking at space-based early warning, RF enabled, which will give their early warning will improve greatly. I mentioned that issue in Chandigarh, how after the West is deploying intermediate range nuclear weapons, because the Russians don't have this space ability, their warning time is just 2 minutes from Germany to Moscow, and that is impacting nuclear thresholds. So the whole issue, China is about to get 1,000 warheads. We are content with 150. The last time we seriously examined our nuclear doctrine and everything around it was in the 2000, 2005, 6 phase. The nuclear world has changed dramatically. Uh, Nuclear deterrence is part of statecraft. And it is not that you feel you deter your adversary. The adversary should feel deterred. So this is another area where I think we really need some very serious thought and investigation if we have to strengthen our case.
Yeah, I think so. Because let me elucidate on what you said about the nuclear dimension. You see, if you look back, we've all learned that there's a nuclear triangle. We are sitting in a neutral Pakistan, China, and India are a nuclear triangle. But I think that's changed. It's changed because Iran today is all a nuclear power, whether you like it or not. So is Israel. So in this area, and and that there could be a fallout from there to here. And in this area, you already have a nuclear pentagon going. And if you add the American present, it's a hexagon. Okay. On the other hand, I mean, I'm just talking of the nuclear powers which are proliferating. Look at it over the Korean Peninsula, Russia, China, and that area. You have China, Russia, North Korea, USA in that mix. Add to that two prospective powers, Japan and South Korea, who are debating going nuclear. And there's an active debate in these societies to go nuclear. So another thing coming up. And the common point with these largely is China. And the way China is going in, whether it's their silo-based systems or whether they're hypersonic systems, or whether they're getting ambiguity through, having a nuclear warhead and a conventional warhead, their integration with space, it's actually force multiplying. So I would put it, their 1,000 warheads which they aim to get by say 2030 is actually something like maybe about 15 to 1,500 to 2,000 effectively when you force multiply them. And unless, I think this is my personal view, or 150 odd warheads which we have, unless we rethink not only our doctrine, unless we modernize our structure and rethink the whole thing, you will not be. I think 150 should be equal to 4 to 500. And that can only be done on if we modernize our nuclear structure and it's just not the warheads. I want your views on that and how we should be able to do it. And if a chap who's planning for the nuclear deterrence as a good nuclear deterrence, what do we do?
So exactly, so it's not only the warheads, as you said, the whole concept. For example, if China is moving to launch on warning, and why is it moving to launch on warning? Because now it is getting those capacities in
Yeah,
space. So it can pick up that. So if it is moving to launch on warning, what sense does NFU make? It just doesn't make any sense
zero.
to me. This whole thing is stuck on this fundamental premise that ballistic missiles will be used for nuclear stuff. It will not be used for other areas. That is also affecting the growth of our, missile force. Now, this is just a very dated concept. Because see how the whole world, what was the Iranian volley? It was a clever mix of ballistic, cruise, and drones. So keeping ballistic for the nuclear stuff, these are all very dated concepts. They need to be seriously revisited. And why I make this point is the last time we got it underwent this massive nuclear transition, as you said, the concepts, the structures all came from a very strong debate in the strategic community. People
And
like
that's not happening
ex-professors
now.
saying that's not happening. And that is
Happening
a
now.
little
There's no thinking.
thinking.
Yeah, I think so.
And
I think so. And I think that's a very important point you make that, you need a lot of things, but you need to think what you need before you say, okay, this is what I want to do. And that thought process is just not there. And for some reason, our strategic community is happier talking about Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, and things like that, and not going beyond that. I mean, look at it this way. The way I look at it, if you want to be a big power, you have to think big. अगर
absolutely.
अमृतकाल चाहिए आपको, अमृतकाल ऐसे थोड़ी ना मिलेगा. अमृतकाल के लिए थोड़ा something you have to do something more than just think normal. Just your economy
Exactly.
won't take you to Amritkal. Just your diplomacy won't take you to Amritkal. It is
In fact, sir,
technology. Yeah,
when you have a muscular foreign policy, it is all the more important that your instrument of force is well oiled.
Well oiled, yeah. And yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I
So
think so.
the next issue, sir, which should worry all of us, is our turn to the seas in space and scale. Now, we all know, sir, China is soon going to be a 400 ship navy. A 400 ship navy is not going to patrol their coastlines. It is going to go global. They are all science basing. Otherwise, we know all what this anti-piracy means. It is all a cover for expanding global operations. They are getting bases in the Atlantic. So their emergence in the IOR is just a matter of time. And 10 years in the naval frame is nothing. It is a second in naval time frames. And the next issue is if they are producing 12 warships a year and we are producing one warship with 2 or 3 years, it is only going to grow. Now we seriously need to do this, either reprioritizing expenditures or additional expenditures, or having a very strong A2AD in the IOR, projecting power across Malacca. There has to be some larger frame to do this. That is another major issue because 10 to 15 years later, we may, as I keep saying, we may land up in a strategic squeeze from the land and to the sea. Now, none of these are easy decisions, but that is what makes them so salient because you
I,
have
I,
to take
I,
these calls.
yeah, I think you made a very, very, very important point. I think we are not thinking through this at all. Let me make this point. Why? Okay, fine. China can make its 400 ships and 500 ships and all that, and you can still go with it. But can you offset that? I mean, we need to look at Houthis. Houthis are ragtag force. They're doing sea denial from land, right, with outdated missiles. I mean, not very sophisticated missiles. Look
So
at
this
the
is a very
Ukrainians.
important point.
Ukraine,
A very important point,
yeah,
sir. Houthis
Ukraine. No, no,
can choke that.
I'll add to this. No, no, I'll add to this. Then I want your comment on this. You look at Ukrainians. Ukrainians are getting beaten black and blue, but they still managed to sink half of Russia's fleet from land. So you have a case where a land-based conventional force is able to imaginatively sink half the fleet, and a Houthi-based force or a Houthi type of a force, choking the global trade. And you're sitting in the Indian Ocean like a dagger into the Indian Ocean, and you're not thinking different. Your views on that?
So you're absolutely right, sir. Now look at the severe vulnerability of surface ships in the area of the Black Sea. वो तो Sebastopol से निकलते हैं बेचारे, far from sailing, they are exiting. And therefore,
Exiting.
the serious issue is that we need to invest very seriously in subsurface prowess, undersea. That is where the whole naval game is growing. The other issue, sir, you say is very right. If Houthis can choke the Red Sea, whenever you speak to your Indian Navy counterparts and you tell them, why can't you project power across the Malacca? Dominated there, of course, there are two narrow seaways. They will say, नहीं ऐसे नहीं होता है international relation. अरे मतलब international relation में ऐसे नहीं होता
Yes.
है. वो कैसे कर देता है जाके होती कैसे कर देता है.
Mm.
So this is the whole point. We need to give very serious, and they cannot be just
Yeah.
left to the services alone. These readiness and our statecraft and our strategy now needs a very strong whole of the government approach because
Yeah.
the world is changing so fast. The issues there are changing so fast.
No, it's not like you said that there's a change in the air power. I think there's a marked change in the sea power also,
Yes.
right? When you say sea power is just not what you have, sailing in the sea. A combination of what you can do from land, what you can do from your island territories, what you can do from sea, what you can do from the air, and what you can do underwater. These five domains of maritime power, again stitched together by networks, space, and things like that, is something we had to my view is we have to really rethink this story. Just trying to build one more aircraft carrier, 4 ships is a waste. I would rather have 100 missiles based in Minicoy and control the 8 degree, 9 degree channel, right? And force PLA ships to go from the southern part between Diego Garcia and the southern end of Maldives rather than come near us, right? I mean, that's the way I look at it. You have to think differently.
The last 2 points that I wish to make, sir. One is about this whole business of deterrence and war fighting. And then it gets, linked to how much we should spend on defense. So, if all that I have said is true, we should be investing greatly in deterrence. We should be investing greatly in deterrence, not because we want to fight with China, but in order that
You
we
need to
prevent
have
the
it.
fight. Now, that whole deterrence thing is not seriously debated, and it has an implication on your spending. So, the very simplistic argument is every time this much of GDP, that much of GDP. And people say, नहीं ऐसे नहीं होता है, we cannot afford to spend more. Now, this affordability, if it comes from an excessively economic perspective, it is not wise statecraft. Most nations take into account the totality of the threat, which is affordability, the strategic environment, history. Look at our history with China, 62, strategic environment, and then come to it. Now, rightly or wrongly, the world is changing. NATO has said 2%, many of them 3%. People are calling for a floor spending of 4%. Poland is 5%, Russia is 6% of GDP. America is hiking up. UK is hiking up. India may for the last 5 years, 1.89, 1.87. Now this is becoming a serious problem. Defense spending cannot be a prerogative of economists alone. It has to figure in the larger strategic circumstance, because after all, the economy also needs to be secured. So these whole debates about deterrence, war fighting, defense budgets, Russia, sir, is now decided that it will be a war economy. 40% of its economy is defense oriented, which means that even in a defense orientation, you can grow. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to become a war economy, but the point is that if war is inevitable, if war is a danger, people change their economies, they tailor their economies to that. This is what Russia is doing. In our case, for 30 years, I have just heard one argument, paisa, affordability. And now the people who are happy with this or have no great problem with this less spending say, यार क्या अगर मिलेगा भी तो हम इतना ही खर्च कर सकते हैं. Now, is that a pat on your back or is this
No, I think it's an admission of stupidity. Look,
stupidity?
if we
So,
say that we can't spend, then it's an admission of your idiocy. As simple as that.
and
Yeah,
so this is it. The last point I will not even make. I mean, if we want to be a defense powerhouse, then we have to see all these issues. If China has got 7 out of 20 defense majors in the world, or out of 27 are Chinese, then we really need to do much more on all this. And there are other related issues about civil military fusion and all. But the basic point I want to make, these 8, 9, 10 issues that I have raised, they are pretty important for this government because it may affect the future of our strategic trajectory, our security, with very grim consequences. And the time to think about it is now and do something extraordinary, because the challenges are extraordinary. It just cannot be defense business as usual. And I do hope
yeah.
that this discussion that we had will at least stir some mature, deep seated conversations. This is the
Thinkers.
other point I wish to make. This mature, deep seated conversations are not happening. Was 2% GDP ठीक है, sir? Just these assumptions. Or how can we project power across Malacca? Houthis have done it. Not recognizing the changes in air power. These will be fundamental errors with very grave consequences. So I think our whole thinking in these areas needs to change, and Modi 3.0, people who matter in the government may like to take note of these issues.
Yeah, I think you made some telling points. What you actually outlined, let me get the broader picture in first, is that the way we're going to fight is changing, right? Our threat environment has, in any case, changed completely. Completely. I mean, it was not there. Even 1 year back, what the threat environment is today was not there. So your threat has changed. Okay. The way we're going to fight has changed. Our concepts of air power, maritime power, land power has also changed. Right. And if that be so, and you want to be a power, Viksit Bharat, Amrit Kal in the next 30, 40 years, right? So you need to have a plan to be there. And that plan can't hinge just on the economic growth or your diplomatic growth. If you don't have the muscle to grow with it, you will not grow there. As simple as that. Simple. Right. So if that be so, don't you think we need a, a doctrine made in by some people, set of people who think for India? After all, you're not talking of a normal national security doctrine. You need to have a blueprint as to look, how do you put all these new thoughts together? Because it's a massive transformation you're talking of. Do you think we have it in us to think this way? I mean, like you said that you hope someone is listening. I also hope someone is going to see this. And these are the questions you have to answer. And I completely agree with you that look, you can't keep saying I can't touch even 2% of my defense budget when China keeps increasing its defense budget by 7 to 8% every year, and Pakistan does it by 14%. Your views?
So, I mean, that's exactly the point I'm making. See, what is happening in our case? If you say that Ukraine is raising a drone force, now people should sit up and say why they are raising it in the middle of a war. They are faced with even grimmer questions of affordability, so on and so forth. They are raising it because they have acknowledged that there is a fundamental change in the nature of air power. In our case, it will be a headline for 2 days and then disappear. Similarly, defense spending, similarly, power projection, similarly, AD. What is happening? That some of these assumptions that we have made, they have become shibboleths, fixities. डिफेंस एक्सपेंडिचर 2% होगा, एयर पावर में कोई बदलाव नहीं होगा, इसकी हमको इतनी जरूरत नहीं है, AI is good but we don't need it at the moment. Now these fundamental assumptions will become your problem. If these fundamental assumptions are not revisited and recorrected, so when you make this doctrine, it should not be that old platform-oriented 2% GDP doctrine. That doctrine is of no use. It must take into account these fundamental changes, and these fundamental changes must be debated. They must be debated widely. And then make a doctrine and then get it, see how your operational readiness is stuck against it. I will just make one point, sir. See, I'm not demeaning a doctrine, but say what I have written, I give it to you. You go over it over 3 to 4 weeks. It is given to 7, 8 more people. In 4 months, we can
becomes
come up with a
doctrine.
doctrine. There's nothing to
Yeah,
be made
yeah.
about. The issue is what? Now, this is it. More than a doctrine, I'm a big fan of what I call China's 100-year marathon, which was ingrained into every soldier, every colonel, every general, every Politburo member, every bureaucrat, every politician, कि 100 साल में USA को हराना है. अगर 100 साल में हराना है तो नेवी को ठीक करना है. See how they got their first aircraft carrier, so you'll be aware of that story, where they picked up a discarded aircraft
Scrap,
carrier.
Varga.
Yes. And today they are on their way to the. So it is a 100-year marathon. When Deng said, bide your time, the actual Chinese translation is, wait your time till you get powerful enough to take revenge and overthrow the hegemon. When you say Chinese dream, it's not a benign dream. Chinese dream, as the Chinese see it in the terms of strategy, is to become the undisputed unipolar power of the world. Now, it is this understanding in the people. Now, I'm not saying that we have such a hostile mindset. We are not like them. But more than this doctrine, this has to become this 100-year marathon, go into the bloods of all of us, because China is as big a challenge to us as the USA was to the Chinese.
Chinese, yes.
So it needs to get into our bloodstream, into the way we think, in everything we do. If we actually understand this, DRDO will not say that we will not reform. DRDO will say we will reform. Financial audit will reform. We will get our theater commands faster. It is because we don't understand it. Everything is tough. Everything is tough. Tumhara ek vacancy, mera ek vacancy, nothing is beyond that. And this is
Look,
becoming a
I
problem.
mean, on a lighter note, if DRDO understands all this, they'll throw in the glove. And say, हम तो गए
No,
परदेश
no,
कुछ
sir.
और
We
करने
are,
के लिए.
we are, we are friends of the DRDO. उनको कैसे समझाएं?
No,
We are
no, no.
not.
Look, I'm not joking. I'm joking on a lighter side, but what you're saying, the larger thing is, you need to diversify research. You need to diversify technology. You need to diversify thinking. You can't keep saying I'll keep living only with the DRDO, and he's the brick
How,
wall I always have to go through.
how do you grow? When I knew a young and you, whatever kind of cricket we used to play, you practiced in the nets with the
Right?
finest bowler, with the chap who
Mm.
was fastest, who used to bowl the best spin. You didn't practice with an Anadi. You practice with a. If there is no competition, how the hell will you grow? So it
Only
is common
grow.
sense
So that, yeah,
things like
you need to have competition. Actually, let me tell you, I'm trying to grow. I mean, being very honest with you and in public, I'm trying to grow that competition. But when I'm trying to grow the competition, I'm getting competition from the DRDO who's trying to pull me down.
exactly. So don't pull down. This is my quarrel with DRD. You please compete better.
Compete.
So this
They're not prepared to compete. They're not
is
prepared to
exactly.
compete. That's the problem with them, right? And I hope someone from the DRDO watches this, and I'll point my finger at them and say, "Look, pal, get out of the way. Either you get on or get out. One of the
No,
you don't have a choice,
absolutely. Now,
right?"
this is what the middle piece and younger officers are demanding. I mean, why should
Yeah,
we lose lives just because somebody could not
yeah,
give us technology? This is becoming a
yeah.
very
I
serious
agree
issue.
with you. Right. Good. I think we've covered a whole lot of ground. I hope someone who sees this gets the message of what we are talking. And this is for all viewers. Look, this is not a day to day conversation on technology or things like that. We made some serious statements. There's no diversity of view on this. Okay. There's no divergence. There's no second view or a third view of what all this. Right. So with this, I'll take a few questions, right? And I'm not going to take all questions. I'm going to just take one or two questions. Right.
So,
Okay.